The night Ji-yeon threw her stepdaughter out into the rain, a man who had been standing outside their mansion for weeks finally spoke. And the first thing he said was her name. Rain hammered the streets of Lagos so hard that night, the road outside the mansion looked like a black river. No suitcase. No phone. No warning. Just Dara, barefoot on the wet marble steps, staring at the massive iron gate that had just closed in her face. Behind that gate stood one of the richest homes in Ikoyi. Security cameras. Private guards. And that was the moment Dara stopped grieving quietly and started paying attention. After the funeral, the mansion changed. Not openly. Not dramatically. But the atmosphere became colder. The East Wing security cameras began shutting off every night between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Khalad, the head of security who had worked for her father for over a decade, reported it to Ji-yeon's office. He was told the system was being upgraded, but no upgrades ever happened. Doors locked themselves unexpectedly. House staff avoided certain hallways at night. One kitchen worker claimed she heard people whispering outside the library after midnight. She resigned the next morning. 3 more workers resigned within the same month. Ji-yeon replaced all of them immediately with strangers nobody recognized. That was when Dara knew something inside the house was deeply wrong. 6 weeks after the funeral, Dara found something hidden in her father's study. She had gone there searching for an old photograph from a birthday trip they once took together to Jeju Island in South Korea. She never found the photograph. Instead, she found a hidden compartment behind the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a brown envelope, and inside the envelope was a note written in her father's handwriting. The writing looked shaky, fearful. If anything happens to me, find Kang Seung-hyun. He will know what to do. Trust nobody inside this house. Dara read the note 3 times. Kang Seung-hyun, a Korean name. She had never heard it before. Inside the envelope was also a property transfer document with several pages missing. Dara carefully hid the note inside the lining of her coat before returning everything exactly where she found it. That night, she searched online for Kang Seung-hyun. Most results meant nothing. But then she found a 7-year-old corporate photo. A Korean man in his late 50s stared into the camera with cold, unreadable eyes. Dara froze. Something about him felt strangely familiar. Not familiar like recognition. Familiar like memory. 22 days later, the man appeared outside the mansion for the first time. Dara saw him from her bedroom window just after midnight. Tall, thin, wearing an old dark jacket. He stood beyond the reach of the streetlight, watching the mansion in complete silence. At first, she assumed he was homeless. But homeless people eventually sleep. This man never did. He simply stood there for hours before disappearing before sunrise. Then he returned the next night. And the next. By the 5th night, even the guards became uncomfortable. Khalad approached him twice and told him to leave. Each time, the man quietly walked away. And each time, he returned. Finally, Khalad came upstairs to Dara's room looking unsettled. There's something strange about him, he admitted. What did he say? Khalad hesitated. He only asked one question. Dara slowly lowered the curtain. What question? Khalad looked directly at her. He asked whether the daughter of Emeka Adeyemi still lived in this house. The room suddenly felt cold. Dara turned back toward the rain-covered window, because for the first time since her father's death, she realized somebody else had been searching for answers too. Dara could not sleep after Khalad told her what the stranger had asked. He asked whether the daughter of Emeka Adeyemi still lived here. The sentence stayed in her head long after the mansion became silent. Around 1 a.m., she walked back to her bedroom window and slowly pulled the curtain aside. The man was there again, standing beneath the weak orange glow of the streetlight, motionless, watching the mansion. Rain dripped steadily from the edge of his dark jacket, but he didn't move like someone uncomfortable. He stood with the patience of someone who had spent years waiting for answers. Dara stared at him through the glass. Then slowly, carefully, she lifted her hand. Not a wave, just acknowledgement. The man looked up immediately. For one long second, neither of them moved. Then he slowly raised his own hand. A strange feeling tightened inside Dara's chest. Not fear. Recognition. Not because she knew him, because somehow he seemed to know her. She stepped away from the window quickly and closed the curtains. Her heart was pounding, because for the first time since her father died, she no longer felt alone inside the mystery surrounding his death. Someone else had been watching too. The next morning, Dara brought up the stranger during breakfast. Ji-yeon sat at the dining table in an ivory silk robe, reading messages on her phone, while the house staff quietly arranged tea and fruit around her. Everything about her looked calm. Too calm. "There's a man outside the gate every night," Dara said carefully. "Khalad said he's asking about me." Ji-yeon barely looked up. "And?" "He specifically mentioned my father's name." That got her attention. Only slightly, but Dara noticed. Ji-yeon placed her teacup down gently. "Dara," she said softly, "your father died from heart failure. You need to stop connecting random things to his death. He knew exactly who I was. Homeless people ask questions. He's not homeless." Ji-yeon's eyes narrowed almost invisibly. "How would you know that?" The question hung heavily between them. Dara said nothing. Ji-yeon leaned back in her chair. "I think grief is affecting your judgment," she continued calmly. "You barely sleep anymore. You imagine secrets everywhere. It's unhealthy." Dara studied her carefully. Ji-yeon was not confused, not surprised, not curious. She already knew about the man. That realization hit Dara harder than anything else. Because it meant one thing. Ji-yeon had been expecting him. The atmosphere inside the mansion changed after that conversation. The staff became nervous whenever Dara entered a room. Conversations stopped when she walked past. Even the security guards avoided eye contact. It felt like the entire house knew something she didn't. So Dara started documenting everything. Every unusual event. Every late-night visitor. Every camera outage. The East Wing security cameras still shut down between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. almost every night. Khalad had filed multiple reports. Nothing was ever repaired. 3 more longtime staff members suddenly resigned within the same week. Ji-yeon replaced them immediately with people nobody recognized. And every night, the man outside returned. Always silent. Always watching. Never leaving before sunrise. One evening, Dara stood at her bedroom window watching him again when she noticed something unusual. A black SUV pulled quietly into the compound. No headlights. 2 men stepped out. Both wore expensive suits despite the late hour. Ji-yeon personally came downstairs to receive them. That never happened. Dara watched carefully as the men disappeared into the formal sitting room with Ji-yeon. The curtains closed immediately behind them. Something about the meeting felt wrong. Urgent. For almost an hour, the lights remained on downstairs while the rest of the mansion slept. Then suddenly, one of the curtains shifted slightly. Dara froze. One of the men inside was looking directly toward the street. Toward the stranger standing outside the gate. The curtain dropped immediately. A few minutes later, the men left. And for the first time since appearing outside the mansion, the stranger slowly stepped backward into the shadows before disappearing completely. Like he knew those men. Or worse, like they knew him. The next day, Dara searched her father's study again. This time more carefully. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne and old leather documents. For a moment, standing there almost hurt physically. She missed him suddenly. Violently. Not the businessman. Not the public figure. Her father. The man who once took her to Jeju Island during winter because she casually mentioned wanting to see snow. The man who laughed loudly at terrible jokes. The man who used to call her sunshine when she was little. Now his office felt haunted by unfinished things. Dara searched through shelves, drawers, and cabinets until she noticed something unusual behind a framed photograph. A small hidden key. Her pulse quickened. The key opened a narrow cabinet concealed behind the bookshelf. Inside were folders, bank documents, property transfers, international account records. Most involved Korean corporations, and almost every authorization carried Ji-yeon's signature. Not her father's. Dara flipped through the pages faster. Millions had moved through offshore companies over the last 3 years. Properties changed ownership quietly. Funds disappeared into foreign accounts. Then she saw a familiar name, Kang Seung-hyun. Her hands stopped moving. Inside the folder were printed email exchanges between her father and a Korean investor named Park Min-jun. Several sections had been highlighted aggressively in red ink. At the bottom of one document, her father had written a sentence by hand. "These transactions were never approved by me." Dara felt cold all over. That sentence changed everything. Her father had discovered financial fraud before he died, and Ji-yeon had been directly connected to it. Suddenly, footsteps sounded outside the study. Dara quickly shoved the files back into the cabinet and locked it seconds before the door opened. Ji-yeon entered slowly. The silence between them felt dangerous. "What are you doing in here?" Ji-yeon asked. "Looking for photographs." Ji-yeon's eyes scanned the room carefully. "Your father hated people touching his office." "He was my father too." Something hard flashed across Ji-yeon's face before disappearing. "Yes," she said quietly. "He was." Then she walked closer. Close enough that Dara could smell her perfume. "You need to let the dead rest," Ji-yeon whispered. The sentence sounded less like advice, and more like a warning. 3 days later, Ji-yeon finally lost control. It happened during dinner. 2 unfamiliar men sat at the table with her. The same men Dara had seen arriving in the black SUV. The atmosphere felt tense from the beginning. Nobody spoke much. Glasses touched plates softly. Cutlery scraped quietly. Then the older man looked directly at Dara. "So," he said casually, "you're the one asking questions." The room went silent instantly. Ji-yeon smiled too quickly. "She's grieving," she said smoothly. "Young people create stories when they're emotional." Dara looked directly at the man. "What exactly have I been asking?" The older man smiled faintly. "Your father handled complicated business. Some matters are better left buried." "I disagree." Ji-yeon slowly placed her wine glass down. "Dara," she said softly, "you're excused."
"No," Dara replied calmly.
"I think I'm finally beginning to understand what's happening inside this house." The silence that followed felt deadly. And for the first time,
Yeon's composure cracked.
only for a second, but Dara saw it. Fear. The tension inside the dining room did not disappear after Dara spoke. Thickened. The older man at the table slowly wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. Ji-yeon's expression remained controlled, but Dara could feel the anger behind it now. Cold, sharp, dangerous. "You're emotional," Ji-yeon said quietly, "and you're embarrassing yourself in front of guests." Dara did not look away. "Am I embarrassing myself?" she asked calmly. "Or interrupting something important?" Nobody answered. That silence told her everything. The younger man glanced nervously toward Ji-yeon. The older one spoke again. "Your father was involved in matters far beyond what you understand. Then explain them. You should stop digging before you uncover something that hurts you." Dara almost laughed. "Hurts me?" she repeated softly. "My father is dead. I was pushed out of my own family the moment he was buried. What exactly is left to hurt?" Ji-yeon's voice dropped lower. "That's enough." But Dara was no longer afraid of her. Not after the files. Not after the hidden documents. Not after realizing her father had been trying to undo something before he died. She looked directly at Ji-yeon. "You knew about the man outside the gate before I mentioned him." A flicker crossed Ji-yeon's face. Tiny, but real. The older man immediately looked toward her. The room became completely still. Then Ji-yeon stood up slowly. "You are leaving this house tonight." The words landed like broken glass. Dara blinked once. "What?" "You heard me." Ji-yeon's voice stayed calm, which somehow made it more frightening. "You have become unstable. You question everyone. You invade private spaces. You create paranoia among the staff. This is my father's house."
Yeon stepped closer.
"No," she said quietly. "Legally, it is mine. The younger man at the table looked uncomfortable now, but he said nothing. Neither did the older one, because this had clearly been building for a long time. Dara suddenly understood something horrifying. This was planned. Ji-yeon had been waiting for the right moment to remove her completely, and tonight, Dara had finally given her the excuse. You can't throw me out in the middle of the night. I can. You think this will stop me from asking questions?
Yeon smiled faintly.
No, she said. I think it will stop people from taking you seriously. The cruelty of the sentence hit harder than shouting would have. Dara stared at her for several long seconds. Then she realized something else. Khalid was missing. He always supervised situations involving security or conflict inside the mansion. Always. But tonight he was nowhere around, which meant Ji-yeon intentionally removed him before this confrontation happened, because she knew he would never support throwing Dara out. The realization made Dara's stomach tighten. Everything had been arranged perfectly. Ji-yeon turned toward the staircase. Pack your things. Dara didn't move. You have 10 minutes. The older man finally spoke again.
Yeon.
But she raised her hand slightly without looking at him. No, she said softly. This ends tonight. Dara looked around the dining room slowly. Nobody would help her. Not because they agreed. Because they were afraid. That hurt more than anything else. Upstairs, Dara entered her room with shaking hands. Rain hammered the windows harder now. The storm outside sounded violent. She grabbed a small bag from her closet and began stuffing clothes into it quickly, her mind racing. The hidden note from her father. The copied documents. Her notebook. She packed everything. Then she stopped suddenly. What if Ji-yeon searched her room afterward? Dara immediately removed the most important papers and hid them beneath the inner lining of her coat instead. Her father's note rested directly against her chest. Find Kang Seung-hyun. Trust nobody inside this house. The words suddenly felt heavier than before. A loud knock hit her bedroom door. Time is up, Ji-yeon called from outside. Not Dara. Not please. Not even anger. Just cold finality. When Dara came downstairs, 3 members of the new house staff stood near the entrance watching silently. The 2 visitors remained in the sitting area, and the front doors were already open. Rain blew violently into the hallway. Ji-yeon stood near the entrance in a black silk dress, perfectly composed, like someone hosting an event. Dara realized then that this was not just punishment. It was humiliation, public humiliation. Ji-yeon wanted witnesses. She has decided to leave the house, Ji-yeon announced calmly to the room. Dara stopped walking. Decided. The lie burned inside her immediately. One of the staff lowered her eyes uncomfortably. Even the younger man at the table looked disturbed now. But nobody challenged Ji-yeon. Dara slowly looked around the mansion. The staircase where she played as a child. The chandelier her mother once picked herself. The walls filled with memories that no longer felt safe. Then she looked back at Ji-yeon. After everything my father built, Dara said quietly, this is what you turned his home into. For the first time, Ji-yeon's expression hardened openly. Leave. Dara stepped out into the rain. Cold water instantly soaked her clothes and bare feet. Thunder cracked somewhere across the city. The massive gate stood ahead of her, and beyond it, the stranger was there, watching, exactly where he always stood. Ji-yeon followed Dara onto the marble steps behind her. You care so much about cursed strangers? She snapped. Then leave with him. The words echoed through the rain. The staff inside the mansion watched silently. Dara walked toward the gate slowly. Her heartbeat pounded louder with every step. The stranger did not move, did not speak. He simply waited. Dara reached the gate and unlocked it herself. The iron doors creaked open. For the first time, they stood face to face. Up close, the man looked older than she expected. Mid to late 50s. Sharp cheekbones. Exhausted eyes. Korean. Rainwater slid down the collar of his worn jacket, but he barely seemed to notice. He stared at Dara with an expression she could not understand. Not surprise. Not curiosity. Recognition. like someone finally finding a person they had searched for across several lifetimes. Behind her, the gate slammed shut. Dara flinched slightly at the sound. The mansion was now behind her completely. The stranger finally spoke. Dara Adeyemi. Her breath caught instantly. The way he said her name sounded practiced, careful, like he had repeated it many times before this moment. "Who are you?" Dara asked quietly. The man looked at her for a long second before answering. "My name," he said softly, "is Kang Seung-hyun." The world seemed to stop moving around her, because that was the name from her father's note. The name hidden inside the secret compartment. The name connected to everything. Rain poured heavily around them. Dara stared at him in shock. "You knew my father?" Kang Seung-hyun nodded slowly. "Yes." "How?" A shadow crossed his face. "He tried to fix something before he died." The sentence sent cold fear through her body. "What does that mean?" Kang glanced briefly toward the mansion behind her. Lights still glowed through the rain-covered windows. People inside were probably still watching. "We cannot speak here," he said quietly. Dara hesitated. She had just been thrown out of her own home. She barely knew this man, and yet, something deep inside her trusted him more than anyone inside that mansion. Another flash of lightning split across the sky. Then Kang said something that made her blood run cold. "Your father knew someone close to him was stealing everything." If the story is pulling you in already, subscribe now to Afro Korea Untold, because the truth behind Chief Emeka's death is only beginning to surface. Kang Seung-hyun led Dara through the rain-soaked streets in silence. Neither of them spoke much at first. The night felt too heavy for conversation. Cars moved past slowly through flooded roads while thunder rolled across Lagos like distant explosions. Dara walked beside him with her coat wrapped tightly around herself, trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. Thrown out of her home, her father's hidden note confirmed. The mysterious stranger finally standing beside her. None of it felt real. After several minutes, Kang stopped outside a small 24-hour cafe tucked between two quiet buildings. The fluorescent sign flickered weakly above the entrance. Inside smelled like coffee, instant noodles, and rainwater carried in on shoes. Nobody paid attention to them, which was exactly what Kang seemed to want. They sat across from each other in a corner booth while an old television played softly above the counter. For almost a full minute, Kang said nothing. Then finally, "Your father was not the man they are trying to make him seem." Dara stared at him carefully. "Then tell me who he really was." Kang looked down at his hands briefly before answering. 7 years ago, the Adeyemi Group was close to collapse. Several major projects failed at the same time. Investors began pulling out. Banks stopped cooperating. Dara frowned slightly. Her father never spoke about financial problems. Publicly, his business empire always appeared untouchable. "That was when my father entered the picture," Kang continued.
Park Min-yoon.
Dara recognized the name immediately from the files in the hidden cabinet. "He was a Korean investor?" "Yes, but more than that. He became your father's closest business ally." Kang explained that Park Min-yoon invested enormous amounts of money into 3 struggling real estate developments tied to the Adeyemi Group. Without that money, the company would have collapsed completely. In return, Park Min-yoon received silent ownership shares across several international projects. Nothing flashy, nothing public, just trust between 2 men. "My father believed Chief Emeka was honorable," Kang said quietly. "And for many years he was. What changed?" Kang's expression darkened slightly.
Yeon.
Rain hit the cafe windows steadily behind them. Kang leaned back slowly. "She entered your father's life during a vulnerable period. At first, nobody suspected anything. She was intelligent, disciplined, charming. She understood business structures quickly." Dara listened carefully. "Over time, she gained access to financial operations, legal departments, overseas accounts. And my father allowed it." "At first, yes." Kang paused. But by the time he realized what was happening, too much had already changed. Dara felt sick thinking about it. Her father had trusted the wrong person. And by the time he understood the danger, he was trapped inside it. What exactly was Ji-yeon doing? She asked quietly. Kang reached inside his jacket and carefully placed a USB drive on the table. She was restructuring ownership of major assets through shell companies connected to overseas accounts. Properties disappeared from partnership records. Investments were reassigned quietly. Dara stared at the drive. This contains proof? Copies, Kang corrected softly. The originals were stolen 2 years ago. He explained that after Park Min-jun died in a boating accident near Busan, his family attempted to reclaim the investments legally tied to the Adeyemi group. Instead, lawyers informed them the investments no longer existed officially. Records vanished. Contracts disappeared. Digital files were erased. It was like my father's entire involvement had been rewritten, Kang said. So you came to Lagos looking for answers. I came looking for the truth. Dara looked at him carefully. And my father contacted you. Kang nodded once. 6 months before he died. A heavy silence settled between them. He said he discovered unauthorized transfers linked to people inside his legal team. He believed someone close to him was manipulating documentation without his consent.
Yeon.
Yes. Dara's throat tightened painfully. He sounded frightened. Kang continued quietly. Not for himself. For you. Dara looked up sharply. He mentioned me? Kang nodded again. He said if anything happened to him, you would eventually start asking questions. He believed you would notice things others ignored. Tears almost rose in Dara's eyes unexpectedly, because that sounded exactly like her father. Even at the end, he was trying to protect her. The cafe waitress arrived with tea neither of them remembered ordering. Dara wrapped her hands around the warm cup slowly. What happened the night he died? She asked. Kang became very still. I don't know everything, he admitted. But I know this. He was supposed to meet me 2 days later. Dara's eyes widened. He arranged a private meeting through an old contact in Lagos. He claimed he had evidence proving major financial fraud connected to overseas accounts. And then he died. Yes, officially it was heart failure. But now even hearing those words felt wrong. Too clean. Too convenient. My father had no history of heart problems, Dara whispered. Kang said nothing. He didn't need to. Outside, the rain finally began slowing down. But the heaviness inside Dara only grew stronger. Because now she understood something terrifying. If Ji-yeon had truly been stealing from powerful international investors for years, then Chief Emeka's death might not have been the only dangerous thing connected to this case. How many people know the truth? Dara asked carefully. Very few. And the men at the mansion tonight? Kang's jaw tightened slightly. They are connected to the financial restructuring. Lawyers. Middlemen. Men who profit from silence. Dara immediately remembered the older man at dinner. Some matters are better left buried, she repeated quietly. Kang looked at her sharply. He said that. Yes. For the first time, real concern crossed Kang's face. That means they know you are becoming dangerous to them. The sentence sent cold fear through Dara's body. Dangerous. Not because she had power. Because she had information. Suddenly, Dara's phone vibrated inside her coat. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello. A nervous female voice whispered quickly. Miss Dara. Yes. It's Adiz. From the house. Dara immediately sat straighter. Adiz was one of the newer staff members hired recently by Ji-yeon. What happened? There's chaos here, Adiz whispered. Someone entered Madame Ji-yeon's private office after you left. Kang's expression sharpened immediately across the table. What do you mean entered? The alarm went off. The 2 visitors left immediately. Madame Ji-yeon is screaming at everyone. Dara exchanged a quick glance with Kang. Then Adiz lowered her voice further. There's writing on the office wall. Dara felt cold instantly. What writing? A brief silence. Then Adiz read the message slowly. I finally found your family. The cafe suddenly felt completely silent. Dara looked at Kang. He looked genuinely shocked. You didn't do this? She asked quietly.
No.
Then who did? Kang stared down at the table for several seconds before answering. My father had an old friend in Lagos many years ago. Someone who helped him during the early business deals. You think it was him? I don't know. But somebody is warning Ji-yeon. Kang nodded slowly. Yes. And suddenly Dara understood something frightening. The story was far bigger than she imagined. Because hidden behind her father's death, behind the missing documents, behind Ji-yeon's lies, were people who had been waiting years for the truth to return. If you're still watching, drop your country in the comments and subscribe to Afro Korea Untold. Because the next part changes everything. The investigation started quietly.
No dramatic arrests.
No television cameras outside the mansion. Just pressure. The kind that moves silently through wealthy families and powerful businesses before the public notices anything is wrong. And slowly, that pressure began closing around Ji-yeon. 3 days after Dara was thrown out of the mansion, financial investigators formally requested access to several Adeyemi group records connected to overseas transactions. The request did not come from nowhere. Khaled had finally stepped forward. The head of security had spent 11 years documenting everything inside the mansion: security logs, camera outages, visitor records, access timestamps. He had noticed unusual patterns long before Chief Emeka died. But like everyone else inside the house, he stayed silent out of fear. Until Dara was thrown out. That changed something in him. He treated me like family, Khaled later told Dara quietly. I could not keep protecting people who destroyed his house. The camera failures in the East Wing became one of the first major points investigators focused on. Every outage happened between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., always during sensitive meetings, always involving the same private office corridors. And none of the repair reports were legitimate. Someone inside the mansion intentionally disabled surveillance. At the same time, the journalist Dara secretly contacted weeks earlier finally published an article online. The headline spread quickly across business circles in Lagos. Questions rise around late business magnates' financial transfers. The article did not accuse Ji-yeon directly, but it raised dangerous questions. Missing records, disputed overseas investments, suspicious restructuring activity before Chief Emeka's death. Within hours, the story began circulating across media platforms and private business groups. And for the first time since the funeral, Ji-yeon lost control of the narrative. Dara met Kang Seung-hyun again 4 days later inside a private law office in Victoria Island. The room smelled like polished wood and cold air conditioning. Stacks of documents covered the conference table between them. Lawyers moved carefully through files while speaking in low voices. Everything suddenly felt official, real. One of the attorneys adjusted his glasses before speaking. The evidence from the Korean accounts matches several unauthorized property transfers registered through Nigerian subsidiaries. Dara listened carefully. And the signatures? Some are legitimate. Some appear manipulated. Several approvals were processed electronically under suspicious conditions. Kang folded his arms quietly. Can it be proven? The lawyer nodded slowly. With enough cooperation, yes. Dara noticed the wording immediately. Enough cooperation, meaning powerful people could still interfere. Powerful people always tried to interfere. Over the following weeks, more information surfaced. Several shell corporations connected to Ji-yeon were traced to luxury properties in Dubai, Singapore, and Seoul. Money had been moving quietly for years. Small amounts at first, then millions. The deeper investigators looked, the uglier the picture became. And yet, Ji-yeon remained calm publicly.
No emotional interviews.
No public breakdowns. She hired elite lawyers, released polished statements, claimed she was being targeted unfairly by people exploiting her husband's death. And honestly, for a while it worked, because wealth knows how to protect itself, especially in public. One afternoon, Dara received a message from an unknown number. Be careful who you trust. Some people involved in this are more dangerous than Ji-yeon. No name.
No explanation.
Just that. Dara stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. Not because she ignored the warning, because deep down, she already knew it was true. The mansion itself became strangely quiet during the investigation. Most of the staff left voluntarily. The grand hallways that once hosted politicians and business dinners now sat dark and empty. Even the neighbors noticed the change. No more luxury parties. No more late-night visitors. Just silence behind massive iron gates. Dara drove past the property once during that period and barely recognized it. The house looked abandoned already, like the walls themselves were exhausted from carrying secrets. She didn't go inside. Not yet. Part of her still remembered standing barefoot in the rain while the gates closed behind her. Some wounds don't disappear simply because you discover the truth. A month later, Ji-yeon was formally questioned regarding financial misconduct tied to international asset restructuring. The news spread fast. Business blogs reported it first. Then larger media outlets followed. Still, there were no handcuffs.
No dramatic courtroom scenes.
Because real power rarely collapses dramatically. It erodes slowly, painfully, publicly. Ji-yeon moved out of the mansion shortly afterward into another luxury property she secretly purchased 2 years before Chief Emeka died, which meant she had prepared an escape long ago, even before everything fell apart. That realization disturbed Dara deeply. Ji-yeon never planned to stay loyal to the family. The mansion was never home to her. It was strategy. One evening after another long legal meeting, Dara and Kang stood outside overlooking traffic moving through Victoria Island. The city buzzed around them with its usual energy. Street vendors shouting, car horns echoing, Lagos continuing forward like nothing had happened. Kang stood quietly beside her. "What happens now?" Dara asked. "Now," he said softly. "We wait. For years. Probably." Dara exhaled slowly. She hated that answer, but she respected it. Because some truths do not arrive dramatically. Sometimes justice moves slowly through paperwork, testimony, and patience. Kang turned toward her carefully. "Your father was not innocent in everything," he admitted. "He ignored problems for too long. He trusted the wrong people." Dara nodded silently. She already knew that. "But," Kang continued, "I believe he tried to correct things before the end." That hurt more than she expected, because she believed it too. She remembered the shaking handwriting in the hidden note. "Find Kang Seung-hyun. Trust nobody inside this house." Her father knew. Too late. But he knew. Weeks later, before leaving Lagos briefly to clear her head, Dara returned to the mansion one final time. Early morning sunlight touched the empty gates softly. The compound stood silent behind them. No guards outside. No luxury cars. No guests. Just stillness. Dara stood there quietly for several minutes, remembering everything. Her childhood. Her parents. The funeral. The rain. The night she was thrown out. At the time, it felt like the worst moment of her life. Now she understood something different. That night forced her to stop pretending. Forced her to finally see the truth hidden beneath wealth, loyalty, and fear. Sometimes people throw you out not because you are weak, but because you are getting too close to what they desperately want hidden. Dara touched the cold iron gate lightly. Then she stepped back and walked away without looking behind her. Thank you for watching Afro Korea Untold. If this story moved you, subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who believes hidden truths always return to the surface. And tell us in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? Because the next story goes even deeper.